I'm Fred Fontaine from Ludlow, Massachusetts. I was brought up in Indian Orchard, Massachusetts. I went to school in Indian Orchard. I never graduated from high school. I was brought up during the Depression years and went into the service when I was 17 years old. Prior to going to the service, I worked at the Springfield Armory, making Springfield rifles. And that's where I met my wife. When I met her, she was Helen Anderson. And we've been married now for 57 years. So after meeting Helen and going out steady, I did join the Navy. I left for the Navy in September of 1942, reporting to Newport, Rhode Island, at a place called Coddington Point. In 1942, they were building ships faster than people were enlisting. So as a consequence, we only had 14 days of booth training. Normally it was about 6 weeks. It's 14 days of booth training. I had a 10-day home leave, and then I was sent to Norfolk, Virginia, where I was assigned to the amphibious group. The amphibious group was a group that was made to work on land or on sea. We were flat bottoms, ocean-going vessels with flat bottoms. I trained on LCI-1. This was a landing craft infantry designed to carry 230 or so infantrymen, and they were designed by the British for crossing the English Channel. But when some of our people saw this in Washington, they thought, well, wouldn't this be wonderful for island hopping? So the United States built a bunch of LCIs. They were building them in Texas and Washington, all over the East and West Coast, to get enough of them to go through out into the Pacific. I trained on LCI-1 for 2 weeks, and we formed a crew. Now, a crew for an LCI was 3 officers, 21 enlisted men. When we formed our crew, our captain was was an ensign, and he was a school teacher in civilian life. And our executive officer, he was an insurance man. And the third officer was the engineering officer. Oh yeah, he had about 4 more weeks of training, so he became an engineering officer. When we formed our watch quadrant station build to see which spots on the crew would fill out, the radio man was not a hard problem because he went to school, and the signalman, he went to school. So those people were in the Navy for 12 weeks. When it came for the other stations, like chef, I can remember the captain said, has anybody ever done any cooking here? And Pat DeFlumery from East Boston says, yeah, I was a short order cook. He said, good, you're the chef. And on he went till we were all assigned, and he had one more ballot to fill out, and he says, I said, I got one more here. He says, coxswain. He says, what's your name? And I said, Fontaine. He says, good, you'll be the coxswain. And I said, what's a coxswain? And the captain says, I don't know. He said, but get your Blue Jackets manual and find out, because I got to put a name here. And that's how I got started. And we did 2 more weeks of training on LCI-11, and then we were sent to Orange, Texas to pick up a brand new LCI. It was beautiful. And freshly painted, all new guns, new cruise quarters. Everything was spick and span. And here I was, the coxswain, and we didn't have a boatswain's mate then. And we outfitted the ship, got it ready, took it on this cruise. We took it down the Sabine River to Port Arthur, brought it into the Gulf of Mexico, and had a shakedown cruise. We checked all the guns, the artillery on it. It had 420 millimeters and 250 calibers. That was the artillery. Then we came back to port, Galveston, and from there we got our orders to report to Monterey, California, to train with the infantry at Fort Ord. So we took the ship across the Caribbean Sea, through the Panama Canal, and all the way around the coast to San Diego, California, and then to Monterey. While we were in Monterey, we worked on the beaches there with the infantry at Fort Ord, training for the invasion of the Aleutian Islands. That's where we were going, training for the Aleutian Islands. After several weeks of training there, we took off and we went to Seattle, Washington, Ketchikan, Alaska, Kodiak, Alaska, and then to the Bering Sea to the Aleutians. That was my first experience. That was the world's worst body of water I ever sailed in. Scary. Wind was always 60 miles an hour. The ground swells there were like mountains. It was very, very scary. And our job was to invade Kiska. So we landed at Amchitka and the Aleutians to pick up troops to land at Amchitka. We picked up some Canadian troops to bring them to Kiska. There was supposed to be 30,000 Japanese on Kiska, and we were supposed to take in 72 hours. So that was our first landing, Kiska Bay. I landed in Kiska, landed the infantry. There was no shot fired except what we fired. We saw no Japs, and as it turned out, there wasn't a Jap on the island. They'd all sneaked out. And we had bypassed Kiska to go to Attu, so we thought we had them all hemmed in there. At Kiska on one side and Amchitka on the other side, but still they all got out. After that operation, we went back to Pearl Harbor. Then when we got to Pearl Harbor, the invasion of Tarawa had already started, and we, Navy-wise, we got the hell kicked out of us there. Because what happened there at Tarawa, the Japs stayed in their pillboxes till the assault troops landed. Then they pulled out their pillboxes and, really did a job on them, on the Marines. So while we were at Pearl Harbor, they decided they would change us to a gunboat. As I said before, we had four 20 millimeters and 250 calibers. Now we're a gunboat. We had a twin 40, two twin 40s, a single 40 aft, still had the 420 mils, 650 calibers, and 120 rockets. Each rocket was equivalent to a 5-inch 38 shell. And our first invasion was Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. When we landed in before going there, we trained invading Maui, Hawaii, for several weeks before we went with the Marines, landing on the nice beaches there, all fully dressed in our war garb. And then we took off. When we went to Kwajalein, it was the first time we used our rockets. And our job there was to go in with the infantry right up to the beach, right up to within 500 yards of the beach, shell our rockets, shoot our 40 millimeters, and then turn broadside, go the length of the beach, and just strafe the beach all the way. That was the first time. I think that was on Roy, that island. And that Kwajalein was a group of islands. So I forget all their names now, Perry, NGB, Roy. I think what we did, we landed on some 6 or 7 beachheads in 8 days. We eventually secured Kwajalein. After that, we went to Eniwetok. Now, Eniwetok was a different experience. It was a big lagoon surrounded by several islands. And what our admirals thought, since they had all their guns facing seaward, we'd go into the lagoon and hit them from the inside. So that we went into Eniwetok, and I think it was 32 miles into the lagoon, right straight to Engibi, and attacked them there. And then we took the other islands coming out back towards the ocean. This was the first time I saw enemy aircraft. Betty bombers bombed us while we were doing this. And I didn't hear this call, but the rest of the crew did. And during that night, first night we were there, Tokyo Rose was on the air, and she said, and I often wondered about this, welcome Commander Harlan and your band of little warriors. So she knew our commander, and she knew who we were, and we were amazed. So anyway, we secured Eniwetok, and we came back to Pearl Harbor to get ready for the invasion of Saipan and Tinian. Well, I got to the landing on Saipan. Now I'm an old-timer. I've been in the Navy about a year and a half, almost 2 years. So now I'm an old-timer, and I'm going to be sent back to pick up a new ship so I can train people. So they sent me all the way back to Portland, Oregon to pick up the LCS-54. Well, prior to which I stopped back in Norfolk, Virginia to pick up a crew. This crew had 65 enlisted men and 6 officers. Each one were specialists, and we did some training on an LCI gunboat, and then we went to pick up our ship. Portland, Oregon, the Willamette shipyards. This had to be in early 1945. We took the ship down to San Francisco. Well, I got to tell you, too, it wasn't always that easy because all the officers were new and the men were new. When we went to San Francisco, we hit another ship and made a 30-foot hole in our side. And then we went to San Diego after that, and we hit a dock, and we had a 15-foot hole in our side. And so we were pretty well scarred up before we saw action. But after doing San Francisco and San Diego and training, most of our gunnery training for our ship was done off Catalina Island off San Diego, where we used our rockets and our 40 millimeters. And until we became accurate on it, we also did a lot of anti-aircraft practicing. From there, we went to Hawaii, and we were a flotilla of 6 ships, the LCS 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. We all traveled in one group. We went to Hawaii, and we were getting ready for the invasion of Iwo Jima. So from there, we went back to Saipan, formed the fleet, joined the fleet there, and we went to, we trained off Saipan with the fleet together and Tinian, and then we got ready for the invasion of Iwo Jima. On the way to Iwo Jima, traveling with a large convoy, our job was to ride outside the convoy as protection for the big ships. That was our main job. And in case of, one of the jobs I hated the worst, in case of enemy aircraft attack, we had to make smoke. We used to make smoke so to cover the rest of the fleet, and they couldn't see them. We did that for a couple of nights on the way to Iwo, and we finally got there. When we got within 30 miles of Iwo, we laid back for a while, circling with the fleet, and then we separated and went to form our line for the beach with the Marine Infantry. I think it was 0700, March 25th, I think. We formed the first wave went into Iwo Jima. And we did the same thing there as we did at Kwajalein. We went all the way into the beach to within 500 or 600 yards, kept those rockets going right there till those Marines got on top of those pillboxes. And then when we got done with that barrage, we formed a single line with the whole length of the island, strafing and everything we could see. Mount Suribachi, which we didn't know was Suribachi at that time. We called it Hot Rocks, code name. And we did that all day long, strafe. After doing a couple more waves, we strafe. And that night we would anchor out to the windward side of the fleet, of the ships, the big cargo ships, and protect them with smoke in case there was an air raid. Iwo Jima was supposed to have taken us 72 hours. It took us 31 days to take that island. But we finally did secure it and went back to Saipan, and we prepared there for the invasion of Okinawa. Now, in the invasion of Okinawa, the plan there was to have two landings. The main landing was towards Naha City, and then there was one at the southern tip. And I was on the southern tip invasion. And our job was to go all the way up to the beach, and when we got there, turn around and come back and join the regular fleet. And the object of that was to separate the forces on the island. And we did that, and we come back and joined the fleet, and we were attacked by kamikazes. And I'm trying to remember which cruiser was the Louisville? She was hit right in front of me. She was hit by a kamikaze right on top of her 8-inch turret. We saw it come down. We shot and shot and shot at it. It just kept coming straight down till it hit. Several other ships were hit that day too, but this one happened to be right in front of my eyes. Well, we spent several invasions around Okinawa. Prior to landing on Okinawa the day before, we took an island named Karamaretta. And the reason we took this island was it had a natural harbor, and it would be used for our repair ships to repair damaged ships. When we took that island, we found something like 150 suicide boats. So that was a stroke of luck. We got all those suicide boats before they could use them. But every night we traveled out patrolling. Every day we'd get another island like Aishima. That's where Ernie Pyle got killed. He was a famous newspaper man at that time. And then when the island was going good on the island, we were assigned to the radar picket line. Now the radar picket line was a fleet of 3 destroyers and 3 LCSs circle the island of Okinawa every so many miles for about 30 miles out, and our job was to report enemy planes coming in. And as you well know, when these planes come by and they saw us, they didn't go much further. We were under several attacks by kamikazes there. And it turned out, I don't have my writing with me, but it was the bloodiest battle of any Navy war was the radar picket line in Okinawa. We lost umpteen ships, I don't know, hundreds of ships, a lot of naval personnel, and we stayed on the picket line. Well, the operation was about 30-something days. I had 20-something days of the picket line. After Okinawa was secured, that was secured in about 35 days, I think. We went back to the Philippines to prepare for the big one. That was an awesome sight, coming back to the Philippines. Every ship of every fleet in the world was there. Nobody said it, but there was no doubt where we were going. And that's where we were one night, sitting there watching the movies on deck. And then they stopped the movie, and the voice over the loudspeaker says, now hear this. This is your captain speaking. We have just received word that the Emperor of Japan requested a ceasefire. That was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. And nobody knew there was the truth in it, because Frank Roosevelt said unconditional surrender. On the provision that we saved the Emperor, and Franklin Roosevelt said unconditional release. So there was some confusion there. But it didn't last long. Every ship in the harbor was setting up rockets and flashlights and searchlights. The war had ended. And there was a damn good feeling. I can remember like it was yesterday. just didn't seem possible. So 3.5 years, I'm going back home. I was 17 when I left, and I'm 21 now, almost 21. I'm going back home. But there was other work to do. There was the occupation of Japan. So I was in the occupation of Wakayama, Japan, Nagoya, Japan, and our job there was to go in and sweep mines and make sure the harbor was clear for the big ships to come in. I also went to Tianjin, China, and Shenzhen, Korea. And Shenzhen, Korea is where I had enough points to come home and get my discharge. So I left Shenzhen, Korea in December 1945 and landed in San Francisco January 1st, 1946. And that was my naval career.